have the kind of job most people fantasize about. I play video games for a living. To be more specific, I test them out before their release date to give my professional and honest opinion. I spot flaws that could make the teams building these massively expensive worlds look sloppy. I know how to code after years in college, and I also have an eagle eye for glitches. These skills combined with luck accumulate and knowing the right people to get such a gig. Most of the time I would do my job from home. One Monday morning at around 11 p.m., I received an envelope on my doorstep. I opened it and found an address 400 miles away. The letter was signed and dated by an executive. He is a professional and legendary developer whose name you are likely to know if you are anything above a casual gamer. We will pay for your room upon landing and any additional travel expenses. It was written. This sort of project requires in-studio focus. I found this weird, but not unheard of. The notion of leaving my residence was a daunting and even stressful one. When I flipped to the next page, I saw the contract. It would pay 30 grand for 16 hours worth of work. I was in absolute disbelief and searched the address on Google to make sure it was a real place. I found the gaming headquarters nestled on a hilltop near a hospital and a shopping plaza. I called the phone number at the bottom and stated I could be there in 3 days. When I arrived at the building, my Uber drove me towards the gated front entrance. I stepped out and pressed a button in the center of the metal barred wall. As my ride departed, "Who is this?" The voice on the other end sounded as though they were irritated. I gave them my identity and retrieved the letter from my pocket. For a second I had a dawning fear that perhaps the whole thing was an elaborate hoax, that the opportunity was simply a prank from someone in my past. The amount of money offered should have been an indicator that this was too fantastical to have been based in fact. The gates swung open. As I walked past rows of shrubbery, the scent of lilacs was strong in the air. A man in a suit came out and greeted me with a firm handshake. "Right this way," he said as he led me into the main foyer. The lobby area had a secretary, 2 security guards, multiple plants, and aquariums lining the walls. "Are you the director's assistant or bodyguard?" I asked. "I'm a lawyer," he said. "My name is Sam Hall. I represent this place whenever they release a new title." He brought me to a conference room with a window that overlooked the rolling desert hills outside. From this mountainous viewpoint, everything seemed peaceful. The office had posters of past iconic video games on the walls. "Feel free to take a seat," he said. I did so, and watched as he pulled out a stack of papers held together with a paper clip that looked ready to snap. He slid it towards me. "What is this?" I asked. "The first 5 pages are non-disclosure agreements. I'm sure you've seen those before, but to cover my bases, I have to explain. You will not under any circumstance leak anything about this game on social media. You won't even tell your significant other or family about it if they ask. If your review is positive or negative, you will be allowed to publish an in-depth opinion on the game. As we near its official debut, said review must be submitted to us for approval before publication. Are we clear?" "All right," I said as I leafed through the stack. "What are the remaining pages?" "A survey. You will fill it all out today, assuming you're still on board with helping us, of course." I nodded as he handed me a golden pen. I read through it all and found most of the parts demanding silence online to be understandable. Once I got to the segment with questions and answers, I was a bit startled. The first few were normal, inquiring as to whether or not I was prone to epileptic seizures. I checked the word no. The next paragraph stated in no uncertain terms that playing in this particular world could induce a nervous breakdown. I had to stifle laughter as I agreed to those terms and conditions. I did not know how extensive the remainder of the survey would be. It asked me about everything from how impulsive I was to the duration of my romantic relationships. "What does this have to do with testing out a video game?" I asked as I looked around. "Is how I fill this out confidential?" "Naturally," he said. "The results of your score will not leave the premises." "What am I being scored on?" "Some of these questions are personal. Your eligibility to be a competent enough tester for this particular assignment," he said with a sigh and an eye roll. "Please answer candidly. This is not about any sort of judgment which could impact your external life." I nodded and did as he recommended, although I fantasized about stabbing him in the eyes with the pen due to his smugness. After the paperwork was complete, he walked me into a wide open room the size of an average gymnasium. He dropped the pages into a mail slot on the way. Glass tables were pushed against the barriers. There was a sweeping view of the plains from a thickly railed balcony, where fresh air filtered through. "Congratulations," he said as a woman in a white coat entered the room with a briefcase in hand. She stepped in front of us and opened the luggage. A device similar to a VR headset or Oculus Quest glinted against its black bedding. He pulled it out and handed it to me. He also gave me a butcher blade. "Whoa," I said. "What is this for? Is that real?" "Trust me when I say it's part of the experience," he said. "Slip the glasses over your face. Let's boot this thing up." The first level was well built, but not so innovative that it did not resemble designs I had never seen before. It was a basement. A table was in the center with tools on its surface, some rusted and tinged with a coppery stained tone. In the middle was a notebook. I walked my avatar towards the spiraled journal and opened it. Ciphers, each one more confusing than the last, were on every page. My initial impression of the graphics was how flawless they were insofar as their definition and resolution were so precise that it resembled footage from a documentary more than it did anything cartoonish. The representation of light and dark felt as though it were ripped from body cam footage. I sat it down and walked up to a door, the only one in the chamber. A menu popped up at the bottom of my vision which gave me an option of opening the mahogany access way. I did so and found myself in a rose garden. In the middle of it was a makeshift pond. The walkways around the body of water were made of concrete and littered with crimson petals. I looked even closer at the water. So many of the red flowers floated on the surface that I did not notice the red beneath the blanket of blooms. I reasoned it had to be blood. A trail of the vital fluid was visible from one of the edges, which led to a mossy embankment. At the eastern part of the garden, I followed it and found a man tied up and shirtless. His torso had several wounds and slashed pieces of flesh which indicated how someone had tortured him with a blade. He looked up at me. Someone had split the bag under his left eye open, and he was still profusely bleeding from it. "Please," he said, "let me go." "Why?" I asked. "How much pain are you in?" Although I was literally speaking out loud, it was all I could think to do since the game itself did not give me any kind of dialogue options to choose from. I hurried closer towards him. A word speak popped over his head in neon lettering. "All I want to do is be at home," he said with great sadness. He was dehydrated and emaciated. His thin and frail figure was only tempered with blood loss since that was what covered his exposed rib cage. Tears streamed down his face and mixed with the blood around his neck, some of which had dried. I saw something displayed in the left-hand corner. It was a health bar I had never seen prior to that moment. I connected the dots and realized it was his. He's not an enemy, I thought. He is simply a lamb to the slaughter. He has no weapons and is in a considerable amount of torment, more than most of the population outside of war zones or hospitals will ever experience. The whole world went black. I peeled the headset off and looked for Sam. He stood in the corner, and I noticed 4 other individuals in white lab coats near the balcony. Each one had a clipboard. They were scrawling notes. "You can leave for your hotel room now," the lawyer said. I barely even got 5 minutes of game time. It was starting to get interesting. That first room, you guys need to work on making it more compelling. Players want to feel like they're thrust into the action right away. There will be more tomorrow. We simply wanted to monitor your initial reaction. Get some rest and meet us here at 9 a.m. I arrived early the next day after 10 hours of sleep. The same crew was there. The lights in the building were being flipped on by custodians, and rays of sunlight streamed in through the casements as the sounds of birds chirping snuck in. "Why are the staff dressed as medical personnel?" I asked. "Don't they know I won't go into convulsions?" "No need to worry about anyone's job but your own," Sam said, as he handed me the headset and knife. I slipped it on and found myself in the rose garden again. The same man was tied up, and he wept as I approached him once more. 2 options were shown in bold writing next to where he groveled. The first row of interactive letters asked me if I wanted to let him go. I could release his bindings, point him in the general direction of property, and allow him to disappear completely. The next and only other alternative was to kill him. I chose the latter. I did not want to risk the main character going to prison. Whatever simulator this was, I had the feeling that spending time in San Quentin was not a part of it. I dug the knife into his chest. For VR, the impact the sharp instrument made on his skin and bone had a rough tactile brunt as it punctured his heart. The noise was sickly as I withdrew the weapon and watched as a small waterfall of fire fell down him and sprayed my digital protagonist. He pled for me to show mercy. I gave none as I went in for another incision, this time behind his neck after he slumped forward. The metal got jammed into the bone again, only this time around it had to be his spine. The man's health bar depleted, once green, and now red. More options were given. The game asked me if I would like to dissect the body or bury him around the outskirts of the property in a plot near the garden. I went with the first and grisliest choice. I split him open down the middle once his gurgling and breathing had stopped. I removed several of his organs and threw them into the water as though they were compost. As I was performing these surgical maneuvers, I felt a warm fluid splash down my arms and stomach. I later found out that the crew had splattered me with fake blood to make the experience more sensory. I was briefly unsure of how they were planning on emulating these conditions so the average buyer could experience them, but I focused on the task at hand until every part of the body was amputated and his interior was hollow. I had adrenaline coursing through me, and everything about the task was violent and barbarous, but somehow satisfying. It reminded me of killing civilians in the older Grand Theft Auto games, but this was more intimate and realistic. I dug the tip of the blade into the cadaver's throat, and as I started to see, that was when the whole world went black. I was back to actual reality. All of the programmers, or researchers, or fake doctors, or whatever they were, stared at me with a combination of curiosity and fear. Terror suddenly filled me. I was scared they would see the kind of pleasure I took in it all. Somehow this was not appropriate to them. I wondered if I was going to get kicked out of the project, and the combination of dread towards the prospect of losing money and perhaps never being able to do this again gave me a sense of abject mortification. How did you find the experience to be overall? Sam asked. What is your score for it? I found it. I could not explain how much of an endorphin rush it gave me. The freedom in its brutality was only rivaled by the first-person shooters I could remember playing when I was little. You loved it, didn't you? I nodded, unable to hide my enthusiasm. Well, he continued, you are the best test subject. This game is called Serial Killer, after all. It's mainly meant for people who can't control their impulse to torture and murder, to provide an outlet for those who would consider committing such acts in real life. You scored the highest out of anyone on our psychopathy checklist.